Welcome, Binge Watchers, where we talk about the stories and characters we love and the shows they live in. My name is Ron, and let's talk about the Netflix limited series, Godless. So, limited series, what does that even mean? Basically, it means that this is meant to be a standalone story. It's done with no season 2 in mind. Godless aims to tell a story start to finish in 7 episodes. Now, does that mean that there definitely won't be a season 2? Not really. I mean, I guess that if this does incredibly well, maybe they'll do something more like with the Godless franchise, I guess. But I really like the idea of a limited series, especially when a very ambitious show you love can just get cancelled anytime for really bad reasons. Godless is a Western. It takes place in the American West during the 1880s, and at its core, it has a very simple story. Roy Goode, a young man who is incredibly proficient with a revolver, is a member of Frank Griffin's gang. They're a group of about 30 outlaws led by this guy Frank. Roy decides to steal some money from Frank after a heist, kill a bunch of gang members, and run away. Unsurprisingly, Frank is not a big fan of this, so he makes it the mission of this fearsome group of outlaws to find and kill Roy Goode. That's the premise in very broad strokes. The fact that Godless has such a simple and clear story at its foundation, I think makes that foundation very strong. I think it's a really smart choice for a limited series. Have a straightforward story as a framework, so it's easy to make sense of everything, and now you have the time you need to build complex and compelling characters. And that's exactly my favorite part of this show, the characters. The story, as we said, is pretty simple. Not to say that it's not good, it's very good, it fits perfectly with this show, but if the characters in this show weren't as good as they are, this probably would have felt like something very generic. So Roy is on the run from Frank, and he finds himself in a town called La Belle. This was a mining town, which means that the town is owned by a mining company and all the men work in that mine. There was some terrible accident in the La Belle mine, so everybody who was in there at the time died. This created a situation where pretty much all the men of this town are dead, so La Belle is populated by kids, widows, seniors, and the few men who had other professions like the sheriff. The whole thing with Roy and Frank is the thing that moves the story along, but it's not necessarily where the show spends most of its time. We get the story of this town and a few of the people in it, the challenges that the women of this town have to face, and the looming shadow of Frank Griffin closing in on where Roy Goode is hiding. Going into this show, I thought it was going to be a super stylized Western action show. I thought it was going to be heavily influenced by Westworld, and I was glad to see that it's really not. Westworld was a great looking show, and the style of the Wild West in Westworld makes perfect sense because it's literally a Wild West theme park. But Godless is something else completely. It tries to make the whole thing feel more real. So while you do have people who are way too good at shooting other people, and you do have quite a few scenes of someone just describing how much of a badass someone else is, which is something that I'm not a big fan of, the show doesn't feel too fantastic. It feels pretty grounded. Also, this is not really a shootout Magnificent Seven action type show. There are some really cool shootout scenes for sure, but it's definitely not the focus of the show. The focus of the show is how these characters are dealing with everything that's happening in the town, the whole deal with Frank and Roy, and how those two stories eventually become the same story. And again, the strength of this show is the characters. There are some memorable, interesting characters in this show. Quite a few of them could very easily fit into stereotypes, and some of them actually do, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but they all have something that makes them special or cool or more interesting. The only real exception, and I feel kind of bad saying this because he's a kid, is Truckee. He's the son of one of the main characters, and it's just like, what happened there? Pretty much every line he has, you can just feel that there were people on the other side of the camera just, shaking their heads like, fuck it, let's just move on. Roy himself actually feels pretty generic compared to the other characters, but I actually thought that was pretty great. I didn't feel like he's supposed to be the most interesting character. He's a pretty fleshed out character, but it's the people of the town and Frank that I wanted to learn more about. And it's almost like the show knows this, so they don't push Roy's story too hard. They give you just the interesting bits. There are a few times that the show kind of falls into obvious hero tropes, which I guess was hard not to do. Godless pays tribute to classic westerns very often, with the music and the cinematography mainly. And Roy, in many ways, is that classic, strong, quiet cowboy who's impossibly good at shooting people, which is all great, but I could have done without some of the scenes of other characters just standing around and watching him do stuff like, once is fine, he's a badass and everybody wants to have sex with him, like, great, but the show does this pretty often. But generally they do pull off the old Western stuff very well, like the ultra-wide landscape shots with the lone rider, or the dramatic music combined with the camera zooming in on the hero's eyes that, in the hands of a lesser filmmaker, would have made for a super cheesy moment, but in Godless, it just works and looks great. And Jeff Daniels as Frank Griffin had to be one of my favorite TV villains of 2017, I think. He was great, a good step above everybody else with his performance in a show where most performances were pretty great, but I do think that Jeff Daniels also just got the best lines. Just like Wilson Fisk in Daredevil, the best villains are the ones who are fully fleshed out characters themselves. They can be evil, they can be assholes, but if the show lets you understand why they are the way they are, when the show spends the time to actually build them as characters and not just something to motivate the protagonist, it pays off. It makes everything better. So, bottom line, should you watch it? Yes, I would absolutely recommend it. I really enjoyed this show. I love the fact that it begins and ends in 7 episodes. If there's a season 2, great, but if not, this is a complete and satisfying story. It is a fairly slow show. I didn't mind it because I got super invested with the characters and I wanted to spend more time with them. But if you don't click with the characters, you might get bored, because not only is this show very much a slow burn, each episode is between an hour to an hour and 20 minutes. So, just know that going into this show. What about you? Have you watched Godless? What were your thoughts about it? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below and let's get the discussion going. And also let me know, what's your favorite show, like a period piece, a show that takes place in the past. Doesn't have to be a real story or fictional story. What's your favorite one? If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps out a lot, and you can find me on TV Time or on Twitter or Instagram. You can also join our Discord server where we chat about TV and it's a lot of fun. You can find all the links in the description down below. And if you're finding Binge Watchers for the first time, welcome! I'd like to invite you to join the Binge Watchers community. Come talk about TV with us. It's a lot of fun. Subscribe to the channel. But in any case, keep binging, and I will see you next time. Pokemon, oh, you're my best friend in a world we must defend.